The story of Sandra Lee is often told as a viral success narrative, but that framing misses the deeper current running through her work. Long before millions of viewers recognized her face or replayed her procedures online, she was a practicing dermatologist in California, building a career in a field that already sits close to human vulnerability. Dermatology is not just about skin, it is about identity, shame, confidence, and the parts of ourselves we present to the world before we ever speak. Sandra Lee's work consistently existed at that intersection, where medical science meets emotional exposure. What set her apart early was not spectacle but approach. She did not treat patients as cases to be minimized or hidden away. She treated them as people carrying visible and invisible burdens. In her clinic, conditions that others might dismiss as routine became deeply personal stories of confidence lost and slowly regained. Over time, this sensitivity would become the foundation of something much larger than a medical practice. It would become the emotional language of her entire public presence. Without planning it as a brand or strategy, she built a way of communicating medicine that felt accessible, human, and strangely compelling to audiences far beyond her clinic walls. That foundation would later support an unexpected transformation into global recognition, but its roots remained firmly in ordinary, quiet patient care. From training rooms to a practice grounded in ordinary human lives, before any cameras appeared, Sandra Lee's path was defined by discipline and repetition rather than visibility. Medical training demanded years of study, residency, and steady exposure to the realities of patient care that rarely resemble the dramatized versions seen in media. She moved through this system without shortcuts, developing not just technical expertise but a calm tolerance for situations others might find overwhelming. Dermatology became her chosen field, not because it was easy or glamorous, but because it offered a unique balance between procedural precision and human connection. She eventually established her practice in Upland, California, a location far removed from the major entertainment or academic hubs that often shape public medical figures. This separation mattered. It allowed her to build something grounded rather than performative. Her patients were not abstractions, they were neighbors, workers, parents, and students dealing with conditions that affected their confidence as much as their health. Over time, she became known not only for her technical skill but for her ability to make people feel seen in moments of embarrassment or fear. That emotional intelligence would later become the defining feature of her public identity, though at the time it simply made her an unusually trusted physician in a community that valued sincerity over prestige. The moment medicine met the camera and became something new, viral attention, and the formation of a medical media identity. As her online presence expanded, Sandra Lee's work began to occupy a rare space between education and entertainment. The content remained medically grounded, but the audience grew far beyond patients or students of medicine. People from different countries, languages, and backgrounds tuned in regularly, drawn not only by curiosity but by the emotional clarity of what they were watching. There was something unexpectedly intimate about seeing fear replaced with relief on a patient's face. This visibility eventually led to mainstream media interest, culminating in a television adaptation that brought her work to an even wider audience. The transition from digital creator to television personality did not fundamentally change her approach, but it amplified its reach. What had once been viewed on personal devices was now broadcast into living rooms around the world. The scale changed, but the core remained the same: real patients, real procedures, real emotional outcomes. Despite the growing attention, Sandra Lee did not reposition herself as a traditional celebrity. She remained firmly rooted in her medical identity, often emphasizing that the work itself, not the attention surrounding it, was the point. Still, the external perception shifted. She became a recognizable figure, associated with a genre of content that blurred the lines between clinical documentation and emotional storytelling. With that recognition came both opportunity and scrutiny, setting the stage for a more complex chapter in her life, where public and private boundaries would begin to intersect more sharply. Marriage, partnership, and the quiet complexity behind public success. Behind the visibility of her professional life was a long-term marriage to fellow dermatologist Dr. Jeffrey Rebish. Their partnership was built not in the public eye but within the shared structure of medical practice and family life. For years, they managed a dynamic that required careful balance, one partner increasingly visible, the other choosing a more private role while supporting the shared foundation of their work and household. This kind of arrangement often appears stable from the outside, but it requires continuous negotiation of identity and attention. As Sandra Lee's public profile expanded, the balance inevitably shifted. One life was becoming widely recognized, while the other remained intentionally out of view. That contrast does not inherently create conflict, but it does create complexity. Careers evolve, identities stretch, and relationships adapt in ways that are not always visible to outsiders. Over time, public observers began to notice subtle changes in how often the couple appeared together, though no formal narrative was offered to explain these shifts. What remained consistent was a sense of privacy around their personal lives. Unlike many public figures, Sandra Lee did not turn relationship transitions into public storytelling. Instead, she maintained a boundary between her professional openness and her private experience, suggesting a conscious decision to separate the two even as her public visibility continued to grow. Illness, vulnerability, and the decision to speak without filter. In 2019, Sandra Lee faced a turning point that had nothing to do with media or career growth. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, a moment that immediately shifted the trajectory of her personal narrative. Rather than withholding the information, she chose to share it publicly, offering transparency about her diagnosis and treatment journey. This decision aligned with the communication style she had already established in her professional life: direct, unembellished, and grounded in reality. She discussed genetic factors, medical procedures, and the emotional toll of treatment with unusual openness for someone in her position. This included conversations about surgery and recovery, as well as the psychological weight of navigating illness while maintaining a public presence. Her audience responded not with distance but with increased connection. Many viewers who had faced similar diagnoses found validation in her willingness to speak plainly about what they were experiencing themselves. The impact of this openness extended beyond personal storytelling. It influenced real-world behavior, encouraging some viewers to pursue screenings or medical consultations they had previously delayed. This outcome highlighted the unusual position she occupied, a medical professional whose public communication directly affected health decisions on a broad scale. Recovery, reinvention, and the quiet restructuring of personal life. Surviving cancer did not simply mark an endpoint. It introduced a long period of adjustment. Recovery reshapes more than physical health. It alters perception, priorities, and emotional thresholds. For Sandra Lee, this period coincided with continued professional demands, ongoing media production, and the sustained attention of a global audience. The overlap between personal recovery and public responsibility created a uniquely complex environment to navigate. During this time, subtle changes in her personal life became more apparent to outside observers, though they were never formally addressed in detail. Long-term relationships evolve in ways that are not always publicly articulated, and in her case, privacy remained a consistent choice. What was visible instead was a gradual shift in tone. Her public communication began to emphasize boundaries, intentional living, and a more reflective approach to health and time. These shifts did not represent withdrawal from her career. Rather, they suggested a recalibration of energy and focus. She continued to work, continue filming, and continue engaging with patients, but with a clearer sense of limits and sustainability. Illness often forces a reassessment of what matters, and in her case, that reassessment appeared to influence how she structured both her work and her personal priorities moving forward. Work, identity, and the expanding meaning of medical storytelling. As her career matured, Sandra Lee's work evolved beyond individual procedures into a broader form of storytelling about human experience. Her television presence and online content continued to center on dermatology, but the underlying theme increasingly became transformation, both physical and emotional. Patients arrived with visible conditions, but what resonated most with audiences was the emotional relief that followed treatment. Her medical practice remained central, but it now existed alongside a media identity that required careful balance. She was both physician and communicator, responsible for maintaining medical integrity while engaging a global audience. This dual role is uncommon in medicine, and it requires constant attention to accuracy, ethics, and empathy. Despite these demands, she maintained a consistent tone, calm, respectful, and focused on patient dignity. In interviews and public appearances, she often reflected on health as an ongoing practice rather than a fixed state. This perspective came from lived experience rather than theory. It suggested a shift from simply treating conditions to understanding health as something deeply integrated with daily life, emotion, and long-term resilience. Her work, therefore, became less about spectacle and more about continuity, showing that transformation is rarely dramatic in real life, but instead gradual and deeply personal. Midlife reflection and the question of what comes next. By her mid-50s, Sandra Lee's life represented a convergence of multiple identities: physician, media figure, survivor, and public educator. Each role carried its own expectations, and together they formed a complex structure that required constant navigation. At this stage of life, the question of direction often becomes less about achievement and more about alignment. What remains meaningful? What continues to feel authentic? What no longer serves the life being lived today? Her continued work suggests that she has not stepped away from any of her major roles, but the way she inhabits them has shifted. There is less emphasis on proving and more emphasis on sustaining. Less urgency to expand and more attention to maintaining clarity. This is a common transition in midlife, particularly for individuals who have built public-facing careers from the ground up. The future of her work is likely to continue evolving alongside changes in media, medicine, and personal priorities. Yet the core of her influence remains stable: the ability to connect medical reality with human emotion in a way that feels accessible and honest. A continuing story without final closure or simplified meaning. The story of Sandra Lee does not resolve into a single conclusion because it is still unfolding. What makes it compelling is not a dramatic arc of rise and fall, but a sustained commitment to showing up for both medicine and people over time. Her work has consistently centered on visibility, bringing hidden conditions into view and allowing patients to reclaim comfort in their own bodies. Even as her personal life has evolved and her public presence has expanded, the underlying theme remains consistent: care, not as performance but as practice. The continuity of her career suggests a long-term dedication to something larger than individual recognition. It reflects a professional identity rooted in service, communication, and the willingness to engage with discomfort rather than avoid it. At this stage, her story is less about where she is going and more about how she continues to inhabit what she has built. There is no final statement that neatly summarizes her journey, and that absence is part of what makes it real. Lives that unfold in public often get simplified into headlines or labels, but the lived reality is more layered. Sandra Lee's continues to be one of those layered stories, still developing, still adjusting, and still grounded in the same simple act that started it all: helping people feel seen.